It was around midnight when a strange feeling suddenly woke me up. I can still recall the way my heart pounded, the tightness in my chest as I lay there in the dark. It felt as if someone had just sprinted past my bedroom door, the sound of quick, light footsteps resonating in the otherwise quiet house. I bolted upright, my mind still foggy with sleep, but hyper alert. The faint beams of the streetlight crept through the thin curtains, casting soft shadows on the walls. Despite the dimness, I was certain I had heard something. My husband was asleep next to me, breathing deeply and peacefully, entirely unaware of my rising panic. Without hesitation, I reached over and grabbed his shoulder, shaking him awake. He stirred, clearly annoyed at being pulled from his slumber. In a hushed but urgent voice, I told him that someone could be in our house, that it felt exactly like an intruder had just raced by our door. He sat up, a look of confusion and concern etched across his face. "What do you mean?" he asked, voice still heavy with sleep. "Have you seen someone?" I shook my head. "No," I replied, but I heard running footsteps right outside the room." The hairs on my arms were still standing on end. Hearing the alarm in my voice, he immediately got out of bed, opened the bedside drawer, and pulled out his pistol. I remember being grateful for his decisiveness, yet fear still coiled around my heart. He cautioned me to remain in the bedroom, warning me not to follow, and then stepped out into the hallway. Staying alone in the bedroom was easier said than done. My mind buzzed with worst-case scenarios. A thief lying in wait, a shadow lurking just around the corner. My husband's footsteps faded as he walked deeper into the house. Unable to control the pounding in my chest, I slipped out of bed, ignoring his explicit warning, and tiptoed after him. He paused halfway down the hallway and glared at me over his shoulder. Even in the dim light, I could see the frustration in his eyes. Clearly, he didn't want me exposed to any danger. He wanted to handle everything on his own to protect me from whatever threat might be present. Yet I continued forward, a stubborn part of me refusing to be left behind. I thought that if something happened to him, I wouldn't be able to forgive myself for not at least being there or calling for help. But when we searched the entire house together, each room, each closet, behind the sofas, under beds, even out into the yard, no one was there. It was as if the footsteps I'd heard had simply dissolved into the night air. My husband's tension gave way to exasperation. "You're too much sometimes," he murmured, trying to soften his words with a tired smile. "I was sleeping just fine, and you ruined my rest. Look, there's nobody here. Let's go back to bed." He returned to our bedroom, leaving me standing in the darkened living room with my thoughts swirling. After a moment, I followed him, feeling a wave of embarrassment. But some part of me still believed I hadn't imagined it. The sound of those running footsteps had felt so real, especially the way my heartbeat had soared with genuine fear. Even as I climbed back into bed, the question raced through my mind: if I truly heard someone, where did they go? And how could we not have found them? Eventually, exhaustion overpowered my anxiety, and I fell back into a fitful sleep. The next evening, a similar incident happened. I was drifting in and out of a light doze when, again, a sudden noise jolted me awake. This time, it sounded like someone had leaped over the boundary wall into our yard. The image I conjured was of a tall, looming figure vaulting over the wall with surprising agility. My heart fluttered with dread. Instantly, I nudged my husband awake once more. He responded with irritation. "You disturbed my sleep last night, and there was no one," he grumbled. "You're probably imagining things again. Go back to sleep." But adrenaline had already surged through me, banishing all traces of drowsiness. I leapt out of bed, quickly crossed the bedroom, and opened the door leading outside. In the faint glow of the moon, I glimpsed a silhouette, tall and unnervingly athletic, vaulting over our wall as though it required hardly any effort. Immediately, I let out a shout, a shrill sound that felt as if it ripped from my chest. My husband rushed to my side, alarmed by my cries. "What happened?" he asked, scanning the yard. He flicked on the outdoor light. Its harsh brightness flooded the area, but the figure was nowhere to be seen. I pointed to the wall, breathless. "Someone just jumped over and ran away. The same person was probably here last night, too. He must have escaped the same way then." My husband's expression tightened with worry. He stepped outside to examine the perimeter, checking for footprints or signs of forced entry. Our walls were quite high, easily around 7 feet or so, and meant to deter casual trespassers. It would not be easy for a person of average height and strength to climb them in a single bound. Yet in that fleeting moment, I had clearly caught sight of a towering figure. For a second, I considered the possibility that I had hallucinated due to stress, but the memory of his silhouette was fresh, distinct, and undeniably real. That was when my husband said, "We need to do something about this, maybe hire a guard." He looked at me with genuine concern. "I hate the idea of leaving you alone here while I'm out. You clearly feel unsafe, and I don't blame you." So, the very next day, he arranged for a watchman. The watchman arrived at our doorstep, an elderly man with graying hair. He wore simple, worn clothes, and his posture suggested a certain humility and age. Yet his eyes were sharp. I felt relief just seeing him at the gate, as though my fear had, at least partially, lifted off my shoulders. Every night, he stood guard at the front entrance, pacing back and forth with a flashlight to keep watch. During the day, he slept in the small quarter behind our house. We had a simple cot and a fan set up for him there. Over time, I learned he was a gentle-natured person, devoted to his duty. He often greeted me with a respectful nod whenever I passed by. I, too, treated him with kindness, offering him meals, tea, and any supplies he needed. For a few days, everything seemed calm. No suspicious noises echoed through the night. I slept more soundly, though I was still prone to waking at the slightest disturbance, a car horn from the street or the creak of the wooden roof beams. But the presence of the guard gave me a sense of security, something I had desperately needed. One afternoon, while the watchman was asleep in his quarters, I heard a knock at the front door. It was midday, and the sun was bright and hot. Expecting maybe a delivery man or a neighbor, I opened the door to find a beggar standing there. He was a tall, thin figure with long, unkempt hair and a beard. His robe was tattered, and he clutched a small bowl in his hand. A chill went through me as he fixed me with a piercing gaze. I was accustomed to beggars coming by occasionally, but there was something particularly unsettling about this man's intense stare. Yet I tried to be compassionate. He suddenly smiled, revealing uneven, yellowed teeth, and in a gravelly voice, he asked for water. "I'm thirsty, thirsty," he said. "Give this old man a glass of water. This old man will pray for you. By virtue of my prayer, many of your troubles will be averted." His words made me pause. Something in the depth of his eyes filled me with a quiet unease. Still, telling myself that refusing water to a thirsty person would be inhumane. I closed the door and fetched a glass from the kitchen. When I handed it over, he drank slowly, then returned the glass and thanked me. He added, "Your sleep is very light. You wake up at the slightest sound. That's why you've managed to avoid serious trouble. You don't realize how big a danger could have befallen you." My lips parted in shock. How did he know I was a light sleeper? Something about the way he said it, with absolute certainty, made my skin crawl. This was the first time I'd ever laid eyes on him, and yet he spoke as though he knew private details about me. Before I could question him further, he whispered, "Don't underestimate this old man. I'm spiritually connected, a man of deep insight." The sound of footsteps behind me made me turn. Our watchman had roused from his nap and was coming toward us, presumably to make sure everything was all right. The beggar seemed to register the watchman's presence, gave me one last cryptic smile, and then drifted away, disappearing down the street. That day, I couldn't shake the encounter from my mind. Who was he? Could he really know something about me? Or was it some strange trick? In my heart, I wasn't someone who easily believed in clairvoyance or mystical powers, yet his words continued to echo, "You wake at the slightest sound. That's why you avoided grave danger." It was possible, I thought, that he had simply guessed. Some people naturally appear unsettled or have dark circles under their eyes that might hint at sleeplessness. Still, I found it disconcerting. Night fell without incident, but I remained preoccupied with the memory of that beggar. The next day arrived, and I continued my usual routine, cleaning, cooking, tidying up different corners of the house. Yet my mind strayed to that man's gaze, the faint smile he had given me, and the odd tension in his voice. Sure enough, just before noon, I heard another knock at the door. When I answered, there he stood again, the same long-haired, ragged figure leaning slightly on a walking stick, as though weighed down by age or fatigue. He looked at me for a few seconds before speaking. "Daughter, give the old man some water again?" I complied, retrieving another glass from the kitchen. This time, however, I wanted answers. After he drank, I stayed silent, waiting for him to speak. He cleared his throat and said quietly, A few nights ago, you felt as though someone was in your home, yes? My heart dropped. No matter how I tried to rationalize it, there was no simple explanation for how he could know such a specific detail. He must have seen the flicker of alarm in my eyes because he let out a soft chuckle and said, I told you before, this old man knows everything about you. My voice wobbled when I asked, but how and why are you here? He took a long, measured breath and told me something that caused my nerves to jangle with fresh fear. You're about to face a great calamity. Someone has cast black magic on you, on your marriage, intending to break your relationship apart. The ones responsible are none other than your own in-laws. Everything within me went cold. Why? I stammered. Why would they do that? And how can you say such a thing? He stared at me unblinkingly. You've sensed someone's presence at night, correct? That was no ordinary person. Amulets have been hidden in your house intended to turn your husband's heart against you. That presence you sensed was a non-human entity, a servant of the one who cast the spell, but your husband will never believe you if you tell him. My mind reeled with a dozen conflicting thoughts. It felt surreal, like stepping into a horror movie I had never intended to watch. My in-laws? They disliked me, true, but had they really gone this far? And how could a total stranger claim to know such details? He noted my expression of horror and said, I can help break this magic. I'll perform a ritual here in your courtyard if you let me. It won't take more than half an hour. Once it's done, God willing, you'll have children, and you'll be free of this darkness that's settled over your home. But you must invite me in when you're alone. Just then, the watchman came around the side of the house, presumably to see if I was all right. I dismissed him with a quick errand, trying not to look suspicious. The beggar repeated his offer, and in a sudden rush of desperation, I told him, come back tomorrow at 10 in the morning. By that time, I'll be alone. Inside, I still felt uneasy, but a small, desperate part of me yearned to be free of my constant worry. About my childlessness, the tension with my in-laws, the lingering fear of intruders. If this so-called holy man could break the spell, I thought, then maybe my life would return to normal. I did not mention any of this to my husband. He was a rational man who didn't believe in such things. If I told him a beggar had claimed my in-laws used black magic to destroy our marriage, he might have scolded me for entertaining such ideas. In truth, I was torn between fear of the unknown and rational skepticism. Still, the next morning, I waited anxiously for 10 o'clock to arrive, pacing around the house. The watchman was asleep in his quarters, or so I assumed, which gave me a sense of privacy for the beggar's return. When the knock finally came, I opened the door. There he stood, right on time, giving me a slow, deliberate nod. Are you alone? He asked, leaning forward on his stick. Have you prepared for me to remove this evil from your home? I nodded and stepped back, motioning for him to enter the courtyard. The warm morning light spilled across the tiles, and the beggar took a few cautious steps inside. Suddenly, too fast for me to react, he seized a cloth from his robes and clamped it over my nose and mouth. A foul stench filled my nostrils, making my head spin. My vision blurred as if the edges of reality were rippling away. The last thing I felt was my body collapsing to the ground. When awareness returned, I found myself in my bedroom, disoriented. My husband's worried face loomed above me. My mouth felt dry and my head pounded. He held a glass of water to my lips, and as I sipped, the events of the morning flooded back in jolts of memory. Opening the door, the beggar forcing something pungent against my face, and then darkness. Tears gathered in my eyes. What happened? I croaked. When did you come home? He exhaled, relief flickering across his features. I came home this morning when the watchman called me, he explained. He told me something strange was going on, and I rushed back. You were unconscious. I felt my cheeks burn with shame. Weakly, I asked, The watchman called you? At what point? He continued, He overheard you yesterday inviting that man to come at 10. The watchman has been suspicious of him ever since he first showed up, so he only pretended to fall asleep. He stayed in his room, keeping an eye out. The moment he saw that man knock you out, he called me and the police, then waited to see what the intruder would do. My husband's voice turned solemn. He was no holy man, only a thief who had recently robbed another home. The police have been searching for him for some time. Apparently, in the robbery, he stole a large sum of money and was trying to find a place to hide from the authorities and stash the loot. He realized our home might be unguarded at certain times. That's why you heard him jumping over the wall at night. He was trying to bury his stolen bag in our garden bed where we wouldn't think to look. When you woke up that first night, you heard his footsteps before he slipped away. He paused to let me absorb this. I blinked, feeling a mixture of shock and relief. All those visions of black magic and evil presences fluttered through my mind. I felt foolish. Still, it was undeniable that I had been convinced by the man's aura of mystery. My husband went on, he must have managed to bury the stolen bag that night when we couldn't find him. The next night, he probably came back to dig it up again, but you heard the noise and went outside, so he fled before completing the job. After that, we hired the watchman, which complicated his plan because the watchman might have confronted him at any moment. He figured out he needed to get into the house during a time when you'd be alone. So he concocted that entire story about black magic to build your trust, or at least your curiosity, enough that you'd let him in privately. Once inside, he planned to knock you out, retrieve his hidden money, and then leave. At these words, my stomach churned. I recalled how my desperation for a solution, my longing for acceptance from my in-laws, for a child, for a peaceful marriage, had made me gullible. I had let a perfect stranger into my home based on some ominous tale. My husband comforted me. "Don't blame yourself too much," he said gently. He was clever and manipulative. But let this be a lesson. It's never wise to trust just anyone, especially someone claiming spiritual powers out of the blue. Through trembling lips, I apologized. I just never imagined someone would use religion or spirituality as a cover for something so horrible, especially an older man who looked so helpless. He brushed a loose strand of hair away from my face. "It's all right now. The watchman knocked him out with his club before he could dig out the money. Then the police arrived. They recognized him from prior descriptions, apparently. The stolen money has been returned to the rightful owners, and the man is in custody." A wave of relief surged through me, mixed with profound embarrassment and regret. If the watchman hadn't been alert, I might have been seriously harmed, or worse, the robber might have stolen any valuables we had. My heart ached to think about the lies I'd been told, the illusions that had preyed on my fears and vulnerabilities. Afterward, as the hours turned into days, I found it increasingly difficult to open the door to any stranger. If the doorbell rang or someone knocked unexpectedly, I felt my chest tighten with anxiety. My husband patiently reassured me that the danger was gone, but it took a while for me to calm my racing heart whenever I remembered that moment. The pungent cloth pressed against my mouth, the sudden darkness enveloping me. Meanwhile, life pressed forward. A few months earlier, my husband and I had started seeing a fertility doctor. Our 2-year marriage had not yet blessed us with children, which had become a painful topic in my in-laws' household. My mother-in-law and sisters-in-law had been openly critical of me, implying that my inability to conceive was a sign of personal failing. In the period leading up to our decision to leave their home, these barbs had become almost daily. My husband, supportive as ever, insisted we seek medical help rather than dwell on sorrow and accusations. I started going to monthly appointments, swallowing daily vitamins and other prescribed medications. Each cycle brought a swirl of hope and disappointment, but I remained steadfast, praying for a child. After the incident with the fake beggar, I found myself more appreciative of my husband's unwavering support. Far from ridiculing me for what had happened, he chose kindness. He understood that my vulnerability arose from the stress of the subtle, ongoing warfare with his family, as well as the desperate wish for motherhood. In the quiet moments of reflection that followed, I resolved to place more trust in him and less in strangers claiming miracles. To my immense gratitude, about 2 months later, I began to feel different. Waves of nausea, unusual fatigue, sudden aversions to foods I normally loved. Nervously, I bought a pregnancy test and found that it was positive. I told my husband by handing him the test stick without a word, tears brimming in my eyes. In that silent moment, his face lit up with such joy that I thought my heart would burst. After so many prayers, countless nights spent weeping or feeling inadequate, I was finally pregnant. Despite my elation, a part of me dreaded informing my in-laws. I recalled how they had shunned me, shown me no warmth, and refused to respond to my greetings. I still felt a raw ache from the insults, the snide remarks, the direct suggestions that my husband should find another wife who can give him children. These memories made me reluctant to share the good news. However, news travels quickly in close-knit families. My sisters-in-law learned of my pregnancy through mutual acquaintances. Suddenly, everything shifted. My mother-in-law and sisters-in-law began to call frequently, their voices sweetened with excitement and curiosity. They inquired about my health, offered to bring traditional foods believed to be beneficial for pregnant women, and expressed apparent remorse for the harshness of their previous behavior. I wasn't naive. I knew a significant factor behind their change of heart was the knowledge that I would soon be the mother of their family's heir, or granddaughter, or grandson. Still, I tried to keep my resentments buried. Life was too short to cling to bitterness, and I desperately wanted peace. Although the abruptness of their transformation confused me, I welcomed any genuine show of kindness. My husband, noticing this new warmth from his family, also felt relief. For the first time in months, his visits to them no longer ended with arguments and tears. Throughout my pregnancy, I remained cautious about visitors. I had learned my lesson. The watchman stayed on, and we continued to compensate him well for his vigilance. My husband even helped arrange for some better amenities in his small living quarters, an upgraded fan, and a more comfortable cot. Sometimes, at night, I still recalled the footsteps I had heard. I remembered the chilling feeling of being watched. But now, with the watchman's presence, I felt safer, and with my husband's arms around me each night, I allowed myself to drift off, cherishing the life growing within me. The baby became my focus, my reason to move forward with hope. My nightmares ebbed, replaced by daydreams of cradling a tiny infant in my arms. Yet, I found I couldn't entirely banish the memory of the fear I had experienced when living with my in-laws. Even though we no longer shared a home with them, the tension lingered in the background. I knew that once the baby arrived, we would have to confront them more directly. Would they demand we bring the child to live under their roof? Would they suddenly become overbearing grandparents? Would the old accusations vanish, or would they bubble up again at the slightest conflict? In slow, cautious steps, my husband tried to mend the emotional rift. He took me to visit his parents after my pregnancy was well established and less likely to be jeopardized by stress. My father-in-law, typically a man of few words, offered me a seat and asked quietly how I was feeling. My mother-in-law bustled about, insisting I rest, that I shouldn't exert myself. She mentioned foods she wanted me to eat for the baby's health. My sisters-in-law smiled more than usual, placing their hands gently on my belly and expressing excitement. The cynic in me questioned whether they were truly repentant or merely putting on a show, but I decided not to spoil the moment. Later in that same visit, I received an apology from my mother-in-law, one I never imagined would come. It happened when we were alone in the living room. She lowered her gaze and said haltingly that she regretted her previous words, especially the taunts about my childlessness. My eyes grew moist as I realized how long I had waited for something like this. "I'm sorry if I hurt you," she said in a subdued tone, hands folded in her lap. "I hope you can forgive an old woman's mistakes. I was worried about my family, about the future. Maybe I let that worry turn into bitterness." I could see in her face a kind of vulnerability. The walls of animosity lowered, if only a bit. I swallowed the knot in my throat and nodded. "Thank you," I whispered, wanting to say more but finding myself unable to articulate all the hurt I had buried. I decided that sometimes forgiveness is simpler than rehashing old wounds. When we returned home, I told my husband about this. He seemed genuinely relieved. "I know they were wrong," he said. "I know how much pain it caused you, but I still hoped one day we could all come together as a proper family." With each passing month, my belly grew larger, and so did my cautious optimism. I was determined not to let the fiasco with the false beggar overshadow my life, but rather to treat it as an important lesson. Desperation can cloud one's judgment, and not everyone who appears kind or spiritual has good intentions. If anything, the incident underscored the importance of personal discernment and open communication with my husband. I began focusing on positive routines, gentle walks in the local park when the weather wasn't too hot, reading about pregnancy and childbirth, learning about healthy recipes, and preparing for the baby's arrival. My husband and I decorated a small nursery in the spare room. We picked out soft pastel colors, stuffed animals, and a crib. Setting up the crib was surprisingly emotional. Every piece of furniture was a tangible reminder that we were about to become parents. By the time I was well into the third trimester, we received word that the thief, whom I had initially mistaken for a miraculous beggar, had been sentenced. The police detective handling the case stopped by one morning to ask if we had any further testimony or concerns. I explained once again that the watchman had taken control of the situation quickly and that I had very little direct interaction with the man after I was knocked unconscious. The detective assured me that many stolen goods had been recovered, helping multiple households, and that the criminal sentence was relatively severe due to repeat offenses. I felt a sense of closure, though part of me still shuddered at the memory of him forcing that cloth over my face. Sometimes wondered what might have happened if I had been alone in the house without a watchman, or if my husband hadn't come so quickly, or if the police had been delayed. The realization that countless possibilities could have ended in far worse scenarios was sobering. However, time moved on, and so did we. The watchman resumed his nightly vigil, though the immediate threat had passed. Occasionally, I tried to express my gratitude, offering him gifts during festival seasons or paying him a little extra. He always responded graciously, insisting he was only doing his duty. In those final weeks of pregnancy, my emotions often soared and crashed. One afternoon, feeling uncharacteristically bold, I decided to visit my parents. They lived about a 30-minute drive away, in a more bustling part of the city. My husband was at work, and I arranged a ride. Stepping into my childhood home brought a rush of familiarity. The cozy living room where I had studied for exams, the kitchen where my mother would cook my favorite dishes, and my old bedroom, now redecorated but still holding echoes of my adolescence. I told my parents all about what had happened, the nighttime footsteps, the fear of an intruder, the beggar who turned out to be a thief, everything. My mother looked at me wide-eyed, her hand flying to her heart. My father, who was a calm man by nature, listened intently and expressed gratitude that I was safe. "I never thought we'd hear such a story from you," my mother said, pressing a hand to her cheek in disbelief. "Are you sure you're all right now?" I assured her I was fine and told her about the watchman's actions and how my husband had handled the situation. My parents offered their house as a refuge if I ever felt unsafe, which touched me deeply, though I reassured them we were quite secure in our own home now. As for my in-laws, my mother advised me to approach them kindly. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what they did," she said, "but if they're trying to make amends, let them. It might be easier for everyone in the long run." I squeezed her hand, grateful for her gentle wisdom. Eventually, the day arrived when I went into labor, an event that was both terrifying and exhilarating. My husband rushed me to the hospital, and the hours that followed were a haze of pain, anticipation, and the swirl of medical staff in bright corridors. Despite the pain, I clung to a mixture of excitement and gratitude. We were about to welcome a life we had prayed for. When the baby finally arrived, a healthy little girl, my world shifted forever. Holding her for the first time, I felt the triumph of every challenge we had overcome. She gazed at me with wide, curious eyes, and I remember thinking that all my past fears, whether it was black magic or thieves or mother-in-law drama, dimmed in comparison to the warmth of this tiny new life. My husband stood by the bedside, tears glistening, whispering thanks over and over again to the Almighty. News of the baby's birth spread quickly, and my in-laws visited the hospital. My mother-in-law was among the first to arrive, a small bouquet of flowers in her trembling hands. She peered down at the baby, tears gathering in her eyes as well. "She's beautiful," she whispered. In that moment, I sensed the entire dynamic of our relationship quietly shift. It wasn't that past hurts vanished, but something new began, an opportunity to rebuild trust on a foundation of shared joy. A few days later, we returned home, and my mother-in-law offered to stay with us for a while to help with the baby. Honestly, part of me was hesitant. Yet, as she showed genuine care, waking at night to help soothe the baby, cooking nourishing meals for me, and letting me rest, I allowed myself to believe that people could grow. My father-in-law, too, visited more frequently, though he was reserved. He held his granddaughter with a delicate reverence, as if he feared he might break her. My sisters-in-law came bearing gifts, cooing over the newborn. During one particularly quiet afternoon, I caught my mother-in-law gazing at our sleeping baby with a gentle expression I had never seen before. She glanced at me and said softly, "I'm so sorry for the past, for every time I hurt you. I hope you'll let me make it up to you and to her." Looking at the infant's tiny hand wrapped around my finger, I realized that forgiveness would not erase the memory of the pain, but It could allow for a better future. I chose kindness in my response, saying, let's focus on giving her a loving family. That's all I want. My mother in law's mouth quivered in an emotional smile, and we shared a moment of mutual understanding. Occasionally, I would reflect on the bizarre experience with the supposed beggar, how he had spun a tale of black magic and hidden amulets. I realized that the darkest illusions often prey on our deepest insecurities. My fear of losing my husband's love, my desperation for a child, my anxiety about my in law's constant disapproval. All of those combined made me vulnerable to the idea that a single ritual could solve everything. In reality, we overcame those difficulties through patience, understanding, medical help, and time. The memory of that night when I first heard footsteps still lingers, reminding me to be cautious but not paranoid. If I hear a slight sound in the house now, I don't immediately assume the worst. The watchman remains with us, though at a reduced schedule, and I'm still a light sleeper. My husband teases me gently about it. Sometimes I'll wake at 3 in the morning, convinced I heard the baby cry, only to find her peacefully asleep. But I'd rather be vigilant than oblivious. Over time, I've forged a new sense of contentment in this home. The once tense walls are now filled with baby laughter, the aroma of home-cooked meals, and the warmth of a shared life that my husband and I have built together. Despite every trial, from my in-laws' harsh words to the fear of a potential intruder, we found our footing. Sometimes I'll catch my husband watching me with the baby curled in my arms, and I recognize the depth of his gratitude for how far we've come. As for my in-laws, our bond is far from perfect, but there is real improvement. My mother-in-law often calls me now just to ask about the baby's health. Has she started crawling yet? Is she eating solids? My father-in-law occasionally drops by unannounced to check if we need anything. My sisters-in-law bring small gifts or traditional sweets, delighting in their niece's milestones. The hostility that once radiated from them seems replaced by genuine eagerness to be part of the baby's life. There is a grace, I think, in allowing hearts to soften and bridges to mend. Where black magic rumors once loomed and interpersonal conflicts threatened to tear us apart, a child's innocent presence has reoriented our priorities. We're not all living under one roof. My husband and I value our independence. But there's a bridge now where before there seemed only a chasm. Above all, I've learned to trust my instincts while also sharing burdens more openly. If I had discussed my fears and doubts with my husband earlier, I might have recognized the beggar's deceit more quickly. But what's done is done, and I've grown from the experience. I'm no longer as quick to take people's words at face value, especially strangers who promise miracles. Life is not so simple as a snap of the fingers or the lighting of a candle in a courtyard. Solutions to real problems, whether they're health issues, family rifts, or personal insecurities, require patience, honesty, and perseverance. Looking back, I realized that the so-called signs of black magic, my restlessness, my marriage difficulties, the tension with my in-laws, were not caused by some hidden power. They were the result of human failings, jealousy, misunderstandings, differing values, and a thief's sly opportunism. The phenomenon of someone jumping over our wall, a desperate criminal trying to hide from the law and stash his loot. Yet I don't dismiss the possibility that intangible forces, like fear, desperation, or even hope, can lead us into dangerous waters. In a sense, we are all susceptible to illusions when we feel cornered by life. I was cornered by my longing for a child and the pain of rejection from my in-laws, which made me an easy target for a manipulator who offered a swift remedy. Now, each morning when I wake to the soft cooing of my daughter, I'm grateful. For my husband, for the watchman who was alert, for the eventual transformation of my in-laws' attitudes, and for the knowledge I gleaned from each hardship. My house feels like a sanctuary, not a place of lurking shadows. The baby's toys clutter the living room, sunlight spills across the floor, and the feeling of dread I once had is replaced by a gentle peace. If someone knocks at the door, I no longer tremble with immediate anxiety, though I do check through the peephole or call the watchman if I'm unsure. That caution, I believe, is healthy. If the visitor is unknown, I speak through the gate rather than usher them inside. My husband and I both agreed that it's better to be safe than to blindly trust. We let genuine acquaintances or neighbors in, but we keep a watchful boundary. Sometimes I wonder if the beggar, no, the thief, knew how his deception might unravel or how close he came to success. Maybe if the watchman hadn't been so loyal, the thief would have slipped away with the stolen money. I feel a strange pity for him, too. Perhaps if he had chosen honest work over theft, he wouldn't have ended up in prison. But that's his story to resolve, not mine. I've found it more productive to focus on what I can control: my decisions, my relationships, and the love I nurture within my household. One evening, not long after our daughter's first birthday, we hosted a small gathering. My parents were there along with my husband's family. We set out a few platters of snacks, put up colorful balloons, and let my daughter crawl around in delight. I watched my mother-in-law scoop her up, peppering her with affectionate kisses, while my sisters-in-law took pictures on their phones. My own parents looked on with contentment. In that moment, I felt a tear slip down my cheek, remembering the stress and sorrow that once weighed so heavily on me. I whispered a silent prayer of thanks that we had all come this far, that a new chapter had begun for all of us. And so life continued, shaped by lessons of caution, perseverance. Most importantly, hope. The nightmarish nights of hearing phantom footsteps had faded, replaced by the sweet demands of motherhood and the calm that comes from a household learning to trust again. If anything, the entire ordeal taught me that real miracles aren't found in shady courtyards with suspicious strangers promising quick fixes. The real miracles are compassion, family, resilience, and the innocent laughter of a long-awaited child echoing in the very rooms that once felt haunted by fear.